Okay, today's daf is daf Eruvin Sadi Hey. We are really reaching the end here. We're finishing the 9th parak. We're about to start the last parak, which is nice. It's a parak that kind of, I read in Safrai's book, Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, he claims that the last parak is really, we're ending this unit of Shabbat Eruvin, and it's all sorts of things that didn't, right? This happens a lot at the end of Masechtot, that they didn't discuss yet, right? It didn't come up in any way, which is hard to imagine how some topic couldn't have come up in all the tangents that they've gone off on. But whatever didn't come up, right? They're kind of adding it in here, and we're going to get off to all interesting topics. In fact, I'll already tell you all the extra material for Hadran, all the weekly material for Hadran is all on today and tomorrow's daf. Okay, first of all, tomorrow, sneak preview, we're going to get to Micha Bakushi, who wore tefillin, and today we're going to start with the tefillin, and from there we're going to get to Micha Bakushi tomorrow. So about women and tefillin and women in mitzvot aseh shazman grama, or women, what do women, can they do mitzvot that they're exempt from? All sorts of interesting issues like that, and just tefillin in general, which is just a lot of interesting topics. Shuli, in her flashback, discusses the some history about tefillin. And in Daf Mishalahen, they discuss the mitzvah aseh shazman grama. Tanya Regev, wrote an article in the Hebrew about the mitzvah aseh shazman grama issue, and the Gefet's going to be on a Machlok Rashi Tosfot about this issue also in tomorrow's daf. So a lot of interesting content that interests you, which is good, interesting topic, so you can delve into it. Okay, we're going to start first and finish up our Eruvin stuff, and then we're going to get to tefillin in the beginning of the next parak. So if you remember, we ended with this machloket Rav and Shmuel about an achsadra bebika. You have a chuppah-like structure, right? 4 poles and something above. And we wanted to know, Shmuel says you cannot drop 4 walls, only if you already have a pre-existing wall. Rav says you could drop as many walls as you need. And then we said that we ended with this issue. Is there debate only when there's 10 or less cubits between the poles? And then they have a debate? And then more than 10, even Rav doesn't think it works? Or is the debate more than 10 and less than 10? Everyone would agree that 10 or less would work, and it's more than 10 that they have this machloket. So now we're going to connect something to there. V'hada amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said, Kora arba'a matir bechorva. If you have your destroyed house and you have one beam at the top, or it doesn't matter how many beams, but you have a beam at the top that's 4 tvachim wide, 4 handbreadths wide. So he says it's matir in a chorva, meaning if normally you can't carry in a chorva, right? It's not a private space, but you can imagine that those walls drop down, right? Because it's not a space that someone lives in. You can imagine, and it doesn't have walls anymore, it's all broken, but you can imagine that from the beam, imaginary walls drop down, and you're allowed to carry, now you're not allowed to carry in the whole chorva, but you're allowed to carry under the space of the beam. Okay, if it's only 4 tvachim, it's not a lot of space, but maybe you would need it. If it's wider than 4 tvachim, then that's great. Rav Nachman amar Rabba Baravua, Kora arba'a matir b'mayim. And Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba Baravua that if you have a beam that's 4 tvachim wide over water, it also allows you to carry in the water underneath. So Mane, who do these follow? Okay, because think about it. This is pitikra yorev sotem in a case where you have no walls. So who does this hold by? So it depends what you hold about the previous machloket, and it depends how long they are. If we say everyone agrees that 10 or less, you're going to say pitikra, then let's assume that they're both talking about be'eser v'divrei hakol. We'd rather they agree, they work in both with Rav and Shmuel. So let's assume, according to that reading, that it's less than 10 tfachim, less than 10 cubits long, and therefore they'd say this works both according to Rav and Shmuel, because according to that reading, they all agree under 10. But if you say they argue within 10 cubits, then you'd have to say, and then no one thinks that more than 10 cubits it works, then you'd have to say kirav, that they only hold like Rav and they don't hold like Shmuel. That was just an aside to try to say, can we see who they hold like? Now we're going to suggest, this is something the Gemara likes to do. Let's suggest that Abai and Rava disagree about the same thing that Rav and Shmuel disagree about. In other words, we're going to take some argument. It's always better if you can somehow consolidate arguments. Say, what they disagree about is something someone else also disagreed about. So let's see what Rav and Shmuel, Rava and Abai disagree about, and let's see if we can connect it to Rav and Shmuel. To itmach. Now we have a bit of a difficulty with the sugya because Rashi is going to explain. This is a case we saw 2 dapim ago, but Rashi explained it differently there than he's going to explain it here. Okay, and we'll go with Rashi. Just know that Rashi has a little difficulty because Rashi is going to take the exact same wording as if it's the exact same source and explained it differently there than here. And basically, it's explained that there's no way to understand them as the same in both cases. It doesn't make sense. So that's why Rashi had to explain them differently. Di'itmach, it was said, Sikech al gabeach sadra, sheyesh la ptzimin kshera. Ein la ptzimin, Abai amar kshera, ve'Rava amar psula. So if you remember, we discussed this case the other day. You have 2 walls of a house. You have a portico in between. The 2 walls function as walls. And then you have on the other sides where it's open, you're going to have psimin. You're going to have these beams, right? There we kind of showed 1 beam on either side, or, right, it could really be just 1 beam. And then if that, right, we can view that beam as if, right, we can say pi tikra yoreh v'sotem, or, right, depending, or we could say that functions as the wall, okay, and it works. But here we can't explain it that way. That can't be what they're talking about. And they're going to explain it differently. You put your schach on the achsad, right? That was the whole case there, was you wanted to have a sukkah, right? That's the whole issue of a sukkah there. Can you call this your sukkah? You put schach on top of the achsadra, on the ceiling there, and you have these psimim on the side. And you have the 2 walls of the house. This, we're going to assume you don't have 2 walls of a house. Most pictures, unfortunately, the picture book that we've been using doesn't have any pictures today. I'm not really sure why. It would have been helpful. But there's other pictures around. The Koran has some pictures, and if there's another picture book floating around that if you have that one from Kol HaLashon, they have some pictures. In any case, what I gathered is you have 2 or 3 houses in an area, like in a U shape, okay? They're surrounding this portico area, but it's different than the previous case. The portico is not attached to the walls of the house. So you can't count the walls of the house. Otherwise, we wouldn't have an issue here. You have to assume you can't count the walls of the house. And what you have is like an inner frame inside, it's kind of with a gap between there and the houses. So now, according to this, if it has ptsimim, now Rashi explains, the first Rashi on the page, amudim kfu'im b'mechitzotea pachot mishlosha. You have these 4 poles that the achsadra is standing on. And in between those poles, you have standing up poles that are each less than 3 tvachim from each other. That is our classic case of levud. And therefore, you can view it as if you have a wall to the sukkah because you have these beams that kind of merge. That everyone agrees about. What if you don't have psimim? So now, all you're left with, this is our classic case of achsadra b'bik'ah. Now, you do have houses around, but the schach is not attached to the houses, so they can't count as your walls to the house. So they say, Abai amar kshera, Rava amar psula. So now we're going to assume, why does Abai say it's kshera? You don't have any walls. How could you possibly say this is a sukkah? So Abai amar kshera, amar pitika yoreh v'sotem. He says, drop imaginary walls from the top of that achsadra. Perfect. Okay, which would obviously match Rav. And Rava amar psula, you can see where they're going. Lo amar pitika yoreh v'sotem. He doesn't think you could do that when you don't have any walls. And that matches Shmuel. So Leim Abai Karav, Verava Kishmuel. So now the Gemara says, not necessarily. Ali Shmuel Kuli Amalapli. If you hold like Shmuel that you can't say Pi Tikra, no one's going to think that you can say Pi Tikra. In other words, they're not really right. Maybe Rava can hold like Shmuel, but certainly Abai can't be holding like Shmuel. Ki pligi Ali B'derav. Their machloket is within Rav's opinion. Abai Kirav. Abai says, I hold like Rav. Even in a bika, even in a big valley, right? Nothing else around. Also here. But Rava, why would Rava say it doesn't work? There, what do you need? You need a barrier. You need some sort of separation to say this is a separate structure within a big valley. For that, Pitikra, you have this ceiling, right? That designates it as separate. We can drop that down and say this is a separate space. But this is different. This about hachadahane mechitzot lav l'sukkah avide lo. But these mechitzot, these imaginary walls, weren't designed for the sukkah itself, right? Now, Rashi says, what do you mean lav l'sukkah, l'shem sukkah, right? He says, what does it mean lav l'sukkah? They weren't done for the name of sukkah, for the sake of a sukkah. But there's a bit of a problem with saying that. Afal gav, Rashi says, I'm in Dibur Matchil lav l'sukkah in Rashi, okay, about 10 or 12 lines down. Afal gavdelo bai mechitzot lishman, and whoever said you need mechitzot lishma for sukkah? You don't have to build your schach has to be lishma, but your walls don't have to be lishma, right? Many people use walls of their house, existing walls. You don't build those for the purpose of the sukkah. So he says, but still, kulehami alo mekilina. We're still not going to be that lenient. Okay, he doesn't really say why, but one could explain that maybe it's viewed like this: in a desert or a valley, big open space. What do you need? You need this space to be designated as separate. You kind of need walls that drop down that say this is a separate space. Designation. But in a sukkah, it's not that you're designating this as separate space. You want living space. For living space, you need walls. These walls, these imaginary walls, maybe function to distinguish it from something else, but they don't function as sukkah walls, which it would be walls for a house. So maybe for that reason, it doesn't work. It's not clear. You have to think about it. But there's some distinction here they make between sukkah and achsadra. So in the end, they tried to say that this is all connected to the Machloket Abai and Rava. The end, it doesn't work. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Okay, who can remember Rabbi Yossi? Let's go back to the Mishnah. We started with this case yesterday at the bottom of Tzadidal and Amud Aleph of in the middle of Shabbat, all of a sudden the walls between courtyard breaks, or the mavoi, the lechi and korah that you built in the mavoi get destroyed, or a house, the walls fall down, right? 2 walls. So Rabbi Yehuda had said, if you remember, since it was allowed when Shabbat started, we're going to allow it for the rest of Shabbat, but not for the next Shabbat. And Rabbi Yossi said, now we understood Rabbi Yossi in one way, but I want to read Rabbi Yossi very carefully because the Gemara is going to suggest maybe he means something else. Rabbi Yossi Omer, I'm back in the Mishnah. Im mutarin lo to Shabbat, mutarin lati lavo. If they're permitted on that Shabbat, if you want to permit them, Rabbi Yehuda, this Shabbat, well, then you should say they're permitted next Shabbat. In other words, either this isn't a breach, or it is a breach. If you think it is a breach, then it should be forbidden forever. Now, notice Rabbi Yossi doesn't actually say what he thinks. He basically says, either you call this a breach, or you don't call it a breach. Either which way, it should be the same now and going forward. You shouldn't distinguish between what it was when we started Shabbat. Okay, so the question the Gemara is going to ask is, Rabbi Yossi la'esor o lahatil. Is he permitting it? Is he saying, I don't call this a breach, and therefore it's even permitted to next Shabbat, for next Shabbat? Or is he saying, no, this is clearly forbidden? So we understood it was clearly forbidden, but they're suggesting maybe not. Now, Rabbeinu Yonatan says, because it does kind of sound like, right, the way we understood it, that it's la'asor. And in fact, we're going to say, Amar Rav Sheshet la'asor, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan la'asor, and we're going to quote a Braita. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a Braita that shows he forbids. Amar Rabbi Yossi in the Braita, kashem shasurin latid lavo, kach asurin lo to Shabbat. In all those cases, right, it's very clear he forbids. So why did they even think he permits, right? It seems pretty clear he was forbidding. So Rabbeinu Yonatan makes a great connection, and it's always good when you're learning the daf to make these connections, because sometimes we forget things or we remember them specifically because we're learning at such a fast pace that you can connect things from earlier on. So if you recall, there was a machloket we learned about Eruv Chatzerot and the food you have to put out for the Eruv Chatzerot. And we had a whole debate there. What if you put out the right amount of food you needed? Remember, you need 2 seudot worth, and then it gets eaten or destroyed or something, and you're left with only a little bit. So there were different opinions about what the situation is. If you're, and maybe it's okay for this Shabbat, but next Shabbat you have to add food. Rabbi Yossi there was lenient. And he said, all you need is a mashu, and it will last you for the while. In other words, as long as you still have a mashu, you don't have to worry for the upcoming Shabbatot. So Rabbeinu Yonatan says, here, in that case, he's very lenient about something being left from something that was established before. So therefore, he says here there was a havamina, there was a reason to think that maybe just like he held it there, that it was okay, then maybe here also would be okay. Now you'd have to understand, according to him, that it must be that the walls were breached or the lechi or korah fell, but there was a little bit still left. And as long as you have a little bit, that might be sufficient, okay? And that was the Gemara's thinking when they asked the question. Of course, in the end, it's not the case, but that was the reason to possibly connect. Itmar. Now we're going to have another machloket about who we hold like. Rav Chia bar Yosef amar halacha keRabbi Yossi, u'Shmuel amar halacha keRabbi Yehuda. So we have 2 different ways of paskening here. Now we're going to question. Amar Shmuel hachi? Did Shmuel really hold like Rabbi Yehuda? And now we're going to quote, and it'll take us a little while till we get there. It's going to be one of those things where we're going to build one source upon another to basically say it doesn't seem like Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. V'hatznan, it says in the Mishnah. This is about a different case. We also learned this before, a good review, about someone who wants to make an Eruv Tchumen for someone else. So I decide I'm going to put up an Eruv Tchumim for you. Am I allowed to do that? Do you remember Rabbi Yehuda said, "Bameh dvarim amurim be'eruvei tchumim." In Eruvei Tchumim, I cannot do it without letting you know, because if I make your Eruv Tchum over there, you might want to walk over there, right? Or you might want to walk 2,000 cubits around the city and not from the spot that I made you an Eruv. And once I do that, you cannot walk anymore from your city. You're only allowed from, the space that's within the new Eruv. So it could be that I'm messing you up. But aval be'eruvei chatzerot, which is only good for you. Again, sometimes we said it could be bad for you if you have two mavos you're part of, and then you're this one and not that one. But generally, it's good for you. Ma'arvim bein ladat bein shelo ladat. You can do it whether they know about it or whether they're not. You can do it on behalf of someone else. Lefi shezachin la'adam shelo b'fanav ve'ein chavin shelo b'fanav. It's a famous principle that comes up in many, many situations in the Gemara, which is you can do something good for someone. If it benefits them, you can do it without them knowing. If it doesn't benefit them, you're not allowed to. That's the first thing. So Rabbi Yehuda says that following statement. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. He says, in this issue, we pass like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can do an Eruv Chatzero, but you can't do Eruv Tchumim. V'lo od ela, and then he continues to say, not only that, but kol makom sheshina Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin, halacha kimoto. Everywhere in Eruvin, Shmuel paskins halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. Well, this actually doesn't sound like such a problem. Remember, we were saying Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to raise a question to this, so hold off. So Rav Chana Bagdata comes to Rabbi Yehuda with the following question: Amar Shmuel afilu b'mavoy shenital koroto or lechayav? That's our Mishnah. He says, do we hold like Rabbi Yehuda even in the case of a mavoy that the korah, the crossbeam, or the post fell down and isn't there anymore? Do we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah that it's okay? Right? As long as it was there at the beginning of Shabbat, it's okay. Remember we learned this? He says, when I said he paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, I said on the topic of Eruv, but not on the topic of mechitza. Now, obviously, this is an overlap. This is mechitza for Eruv. But he says when it comes to creating mechitzot for Eruvin, on those issues, Shmuel didn't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. And that's because we talked about this last time. Mechitzot has ramifications for all sorts of other halachot. So he didn't necessarily agree with Rabbi Yehuda in those cases because they have ramifications in other areas, not just in Eruvin. Whether you count something as a mechitza or not, right? Whether this has to do with other things, and therefore he doesn't hold like him. So here you see, he doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda on this issue. So how can you say Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? This seems to go against it explicitly. Okay, I can explain this according to Shmuel. It all depends. Are we talking about a mavoi that was opening to the public domain? In that case, we're not going to be lenient like Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to be more stringent because there you're talking about Rishut Rabim versus a case where it's opening up to a Carmelite, where it's only Rabbanan. So when it's Rabbanan, he'll paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. But when he said he doesn't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, when it comes to mechitzot, that's when we're talking about a mechitza issue that's a D'oraita issue. Okay, so when it's Torah law, we're not going to be lenient. When it's rabbinic law, we will be lenient like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, last mission of our parak. Haboneh aliyah gabe shnei batim. You also would have wished you had done a picture here, but imagine, okay, this sometimes happens like over a highway, you have an overpass. Okay, that's going to be the next case. Okay, so if you have an overpass over a highway, so it has walls on the sides, and then it has an overpass going over. The Koran also has some pictures of this. Or two houses that are on opposite sides of the street. And instead of building your second floor, okay, it's a little bit strange, you would do this, but instead of building your second floor on top of your house, what you do is you build a second floor that goes between my house and your house up, raised above the street underneath. So you basically end up with a covered part of the Rishut HaRabim, okay, either by this bridge or by the houses, right? This second floor that you built up in the air. So according to this, mitaltalin tachtehem b'Shabbat divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Now we'll assume, although we'll talk about it in the Gemara, but we'll assume this works right now because of pi tikra yoreh v'sotem. Again, the walls on the side can basically drop down, right? As Julia, thank you for saying, it's not so unusual in medieval towns. In fact, in the Koran, they bring a picture of in Spain, like some, bridge that goes over water. Anyway, you can imagine those kind of things, and they still exist today. So now they say, Chachamim say this doesn't work. Ve'od, and another debate they have, which you'll have to see in the Gemara is going to assume this must be based on something else, because if it's based on the exact same logic, there would be no reason for the Mishnah to say this case. If you have, this goes back again to the beginning of the Masechet. If you have, normally we talk about a mavoi you can fix is a mavoi with 3 mechitzot, 3 walls, open only on one side. There's a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. What if it's open mefulash? Means it's open on both sides, just like the gesher mefulash, it's open on both sides. So if the mavoi is open on 2 sides to the public domain, are you allowed to fix it with an eruv or not? So Rabbi Yehuda says yes, the rabbis say no. So Amar Rabba. So Rabba starts out to explain Rabbi Yehuda. Lo tema hainu tama de Rabbi Yehuda. Don't say his reason is mishum de kasava shtei mechitzot oraita. Again, review of something we learned before. It's great at the end of the Masechet, right? Probably most people who do Daf Yomi don't really have time to go back and review, but the Gemara is doing it for us. So we saw Machloket Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, which we're going to see in a minute, about are 2 walls already considered enough to say this is its own domain, or is it not? Okay. Do you need 3 walls? Kind of like a sukkah, right? Do you need 3 walls? So are 2 mechitzot enough from the Torah law to say this is already a closed space? Like, for example, 2 houses on opposite sides of the street. So you have the wall of one house and the wall of the other house. If you say it's d'oraita, those are mechitzot, then you can fix it with a lechi or a korah. You could put up some sort of marker for the 3rd wall and already say this is totally fine, and we can carry in between our 2 houses, even though there's a public domain in between. So he's basically saying, don't say that that's the reason why this works in our Mishnah. Because again, in our Mishnah, what do you have? You have an aliyah on top of 2 houses. You have 2 walls on the side there. Additionally, you have the bridge. The bridge, we said, has 2 mechitzot on the side. So maybe that's why Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi says that's not why Rabbi Yehuda allows it here. Because then you'd say, oh, shtei mechitzot d'oraita, so therefore we can allow carrying here, underneath it. So he says, no, it's not because of that. It's ela mishum de kasaval, pi tikra yoreh v'sotem. It's because he views these imaginary walls dropping down. It's because of that and not because of 2 mechitzot d'oraita. So Eitiv Abai says, what are you talking about? It says in the Tosefta, and this we've learned a few times, Yetel ken amar Rabbi Yehuda. Additionally, Rabbi Yehuda said, it's exactly what I said before. 2 houses on opposite sides of the street. And notice who's talking, Rabbi Yehuda. All you do is put up a lechi or a korah on either side, and on both sides, and then you can carry between, because really 2 mechitzot is sufficient. We just need the lechi or korah to show us a demarcation for the 3rd wall, but you don't really need it. You need it, but you don't need it, from Torah law. So there you see. And Amrulo, the Chachamim said to him, that doesn't work, because they think 3 walls is d'oraita. So how could you say our Mishnah isn't based on that? It's clearly that's Rabbi Yehuda's approach. So he gives him an interesting answer. You're right. From the Tosefta, you can infer that that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But from our Mishnah, you can't infer that, because from our Mishnah, you could say that he holds pi tikrei yoreh v'sotem. In other words, I'm not denying that that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. I'm just saying that that's not the logic upon which he said his halacha in the Mishnah. And Amar Rav Ashi is going to further prove Rabba. Manita nami dai kami dekatane va'odam Rabbi Yehuda ma'avim b'mavoyim mefulash b'chachamim osrim. Why? If you say the first part of the Mishnah was based on the logic of on the law of pi tikra yoreh v'sotem, imaginary walls dropping down, then you say ve'od is a further case which has to do with 2 mechitzot, because the mavoi has 2 mechitzot, and that's why you can fix it according to Rabbi Yehuda. And then it makes sense that they added this other case because it's based on something else. But but then what's the ve'od coming to tell you? It's basically the exact same thing. You wouldn't need that line. You would know it. It would be obvious. And therefore, shema mina. Therefore, we can infer that it's because of pi tikra yoreh v'sotem. Hadron alach kol gagot. And now we're going to move on to the next parak, the last and final parak. Hamotzei tefillin. If somebody finds tefillin, okay, now. Okay, we're a little bit off topic, although you're going to see it's going to connect to carrying. Rashi says, where do you find these tefillin? Basadeh b'makom shene'evadim. You find tefillin in a place where they could get lost, destroyed, ruined, and you find them on Shabbat, and you're out in the field, and you can't carry there, and you're stuck. So what do you do with these tefillin? Now, number one, there's the issue, you might want to save them. Number two, we're going to see that you're obligated to save them. You can't see tefillin on the street and just ignore them and say, oh, I'll just leave them. Tefillin have sanctity to them and they have to be treated with proper sanctity. Therefore, if you see them lying there on Shabbat, you must protect them. So what do? Machloket, Tanakama, and Rabban Gamliel. Machnisan zug zug. You bring them in by pairs, meaning pair, tefillin shel yad, tefillin shel rosh, the ones you wear on your head, the ones you wear on your arms, you put them on, and then you bring them into the city, and then you go back, you take them off, then you go back. This reminds us of, remember when we had the fire and you want to save them? And right, we talked about in general tefillin that they were very expensive also, but really we're not worried about the expense here. It's more the issue of sanctity, and we'll see that in a minute. Rabban Gamliel omer shnayim shnayim. He says you can do 2 sets at a time. Put on 2 sets, walk home. Put on 2 sets, walk home. Okay, we're going to have to get to in the Gemara, why 2? Why is 2 the magic number? Why not 3? Why not 4? What's going on here? And what exactly is the root of the debate, which is going to be the end of our Gemara today, which is going to lead into tomorrow's daf, which is what exactly is the root of the debate between them. B'meh dvarim amurim b'yishanot aval b'chadashot patur. Here we get to the fact that you're chayav, because all of a sudden they say you're exempt if they're new. What is this exempt being new? What does this have to do with new and old? So they seem to say that what must have happened is, okay, again, this is unclear in the Mishnah. These are commentaries. But the assumption is the straps of the tefillin were not tied. Normally in tefillin, they're tied and then they form the shape of the letter Daled. Okay? Now, if they're untied, so think about it. If they're old, imagine you take a very old pair of tefillin and you untie the knot. When you untie the knot, you can see exactly where the knot was tied because the leather is bent in those places. So it's very identifiable that it was tied in a Daled if it was old. If it was new, you can't tell. So you might say, who cares whether it was tied in a Daled or not? So the issue is, and this is very interesting, what they claim is that there were kameot, amulets, that looked like tefillin, that were very similar. And it would be hard to distinguish. The main difference between them was that you didn't tie the straps in a shape of a Daled. Okay, some people say just that you didn't tie them at all, or some people say you tie them around your neck rather than, and as you use the straps, right, it's hard for us to imagine because you wouldn't necessarily use leather straps for, like tefillin straps for a necklace or something, for an amulet. But apparently in those days they did. And therefore it'd be very unclear whether these were tefillin or whether they were amulets. And because of that, an amulet, and this is why I said it all has to do with sanctity. An amulet doesn't have sanctity. Remember, it doesn't really have God's name. And even if it does, it's all written differently. And we already learned that they don't have the same sanctity as tefillin do. This goes all the way back to Shabbat. We were talking about the bathroom with amulets versus tefillin. So the issue is that if it's new, you can't tell whether it was tied for the purposes of whether it was tied for the purposes of an amulet or whether it was tied for the purposes of tefillin. If it's old, you can clearly tell. So then you know for sure it's tefillin. If you don't know for sure it's tefillin, then you're exempt. This obligation of saving them doesn't apply out of doubt, which is interesting. Mitza'an sfatim o krichot. Let's say you found them tied together or bundles of them, or we're going to see in the Gemara exactly what the difference between these two are, where you can't possibly either you can't untie them to wear them or you can't carry them all. So what do? Machshich alehem. You stay there and stand there and protect them until the end of Shabbat. Umivi'an. And then you bring them back after Shabbat. Ubesakana. Again, there's a lot of things unclear about this Mishnah. Does this refer to the case we just said, or does it refer to the beginning of the Mishnah? If it's a chat sakana, and it's not even clear what sakana means, Rashi says you're worried about robbers, like you're standing there on the street to watch them all Shabbat, right? In this abandoned field or whatever it is, right? Wherever it is, it's dangerous. So if it's dangerous to stand there, then mechasan v'holechlo. Then you don't have to stand there all Shabbat and protect them. You can cover them and go back home. Some people say sakana has to do, and we're going to see this in the Gemara, it's going to be raised as a question, what is sakana? Is it maybe sakana? Often we talk about, like I'll give you an example, Hanukkah candles. The issue of sakana comes up if it's dangerous to put them outside because of the people, the Gentiles living there are going to see that you're Jewish and they don't allow that kind of thing. Or for example, here, they don't allow you to wear tefillin, which we saw there were cases where they didn't allow people to wear tefillin. Then it goes back to the beginning of the Mishnah, which is you can't carry them zug zug because they're going to see you, right? And then you can basically just cover them and go home. Rabbi Shimon Omer, notnam lechavero v'chavero lechavero ad shemegia lechatzer chitzona. He says, Remember, you can carry an object less than 4 cubits in Reshut Rabim by Torah law. So there's 2 options here, and it's interesting to wonder why he didn't pick the other option, which is, if you remember, in order to be obligated for carrying, you have to lift it, right? Akira and hanacha, put it down. This goes back to the first Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat. If you only did one, so let's say you pick it up and you put it down within 4 tvachim, and then you pick it up again and put it down within 4 amot, within 4 cubits, and then you keep doing that, theoretically, that's not forbidden by Torah law. So he doesn't suggest that suggestion. Instead, he says, give it to the next person and just basically make an assembly line of people, and everyone passes to their friend. And with that, you'll get the tefillin back to, they say, until you get to the nearest courtyard. Basically, you're out of the city. You want to get to the first courtyard of the city. How do you put it into the courtyard? Isn't that Reshut? One thing within Reshut Rabim, you're not passing 4 amot, but here you're passing from Reshut Rabim into a private domain. So again, they say, do it in a way where one person picked it up and the other person put it down, and each one only does half a malacha, and then it will be okay. There's another question here, which is why can't you just do this with 2 people, right? One passes to the other and then switch positions, and then you can keep going. Can you or can't you? It's not clear. Here they seem to say get a lot of people, but theoretically you could also do it with just 2 people, which is obviously easier to put together than getting a whole slew of people who are going to join this activity. Especially if you're outside in the field, there's probably not a lot of people here. V'chein, now all of a sudden we switch gears. V'chein b'no. What if you have a newborn baby that was born outside in the field? Woman gives birth, and you want to get this baby home. You don't want to leave the baby out in the sun or whatever it might be. You want to get that baby home. So how do you get the baby home? Okay, some of you might cringe when you hear this. Even up to 100. First of all, why did he only say mea here and it didn't say it in the previous case? It's a good question. Why would you cringe? Because, right, we're all very careful. Okay, forget about now with everyone being very germ crazy, but even when you're not crazy, there's no reason to worry about germs in general. But, right, people are always worried about newborn infants getting infections, and they always say, keep them away from people, right? Some people don't allow their newborns to be carried by anybody. Here, we're basically passing the baby. I mean, you can obviously assume that they didn't understand about infections maybe like we did, and they weren't as careful about things. But, passing the baby from person to person seems like an interesting option that you might not want to try. You might be happy you're there to do the swap of 2 people. Okay. And in that way, but obviously, what do you see here? It was very important for them to get the baby home, so they allow it. Rabbi Yehuda all of a sudden says, well, you know what? Rabbi Shimon, you're talking about unique situations, health of a baby, a newborn, and saving these tefillin, which is considered very important. But I think you can use this even for anything and now there's a debate whether he really means anything, or some people say maybe even what he's talking about is only really for the purposes of a sick person or something like that. But it's unclear. So he says, Noten adam chavit lechavero v'chavero lechavero. You can pass a barrel from one to the other, one to the other, one to the other. He sounds like he's talking about anything. But like I said, some people think he must be talking about something, only that you really have a need for. Otherwise, we really wouldn't allow this lechatchila, right? Nobody says, oh, you want to carry? Oh, so go do this kind of thing. So afilu chutz, and then he even says, afilu chutz l'tchum. You can even get an item to go outside tchum Shabbat in this way. Now, this is a little bit strange, and we'll have to see in the Gemara why this is, not yet today. Amrulo, lo talech zo yoter meragle ba'aleha. They say to him, what are you talking about? You can't do this, right? This is, you remember, tchumin, again, chazara, when we learn tchumin, what did we learn? Not only you can't go more than your 2,000 cubits, but any food that you own can't go, any items that you own. So this barrel cannot go, you can't pass it to someone else and go with their tchum Shabbat. No, it goes by the tchum Shabbat of its owner. So we'll have to see why Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's okay. So now, right, the question with the baby, I see in the chat, I'm not sure if it's pikuach nefesh or it's just, protecting the baby. If it was pikuach nefesh, then obviously anything's allowed. It must be something about, about where it's kind of on the border between, it's just better for the baby. I mean, it's not dangerous for a baby to be outside. It's not like it's dangerous. So you'd have to figure it out, but they do see big enough need to bring the baby home. So now we're going to start with Tanakama, then we're going to move to Rabban Gamliel, and then we're going to try to figure out what's the root of the debate between them. Zug echad in tefelo. So clearly the rabbis hold Tanakama, 1 pair and not 2 pairs. So the Gemara assumes, if we're going to say that, Lema stama deloka Rabbi Meir, it sounds like the Stam Mishnah, meaning the Tanakama's opinion, is not like Rabbi Meir. Why? Ti'ike Rabbi Meir ha'amar Rabbi Meir said, and this is going to be in the sugya about the fire in Shabbat in Daf Kuf Chaf. Lovesh komash yachol lebosh, v'otev komash yachol la'atof. According to Rabbi Meir, you can wear as many pairs of clothing as you want. So likewise, you should be able to put on multiple pairs of tefillin. How do we know that Rabbi Meir holds this? Ditnan, it says in the Mishnah, Ulesham motzi kol klei tashmisho, v'lovesh komash yachol lebosh, v'otev komash yachol la'atof. You can wear layers upon layers upon layers. But now, how do we know it's Rabbi Meir? Vayistama mimai de Rabbi Meir. Notice Rabbi Meir's name didn't appear there, but we want to basically say, our Tana clearly doesn't hold by that. So how do we know it's Rabbi Meir? To Katane Allah, there's a bright on that which says, Loveshu motziu poshet, v'loveshu motziu poshet, afilu koleyom kulo divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, you could keep doing this. You could put on lots of clothes and layers and scarves and, walk, put it down in a safe place, come back, do it again all day long. He says that's not a problem when you have a fire. Obviously, if you're not in danger going into where the fire is going on, but assuming you're not. So again, once it's a second night for show, maybe you could even put out the fire. This is cases where there's some local kind of fire that's not going to catch, and you can basically save your stuff. So Amar Rava, Afilu Tema Rabbi Meir, he says, no, I can explain Tanakama to match Rabbi Meir. How so? Hatam derech mabusho kichol shavi Rabbanan. There, the rabbis allowed you to do it the way you might wear something on a regular day. The hacha, likewise with the tefillin, they allowed it. Derech mabusho kechol shavi Rabbanan. They said the way you would normally wear tefillin during the week. So hatam there debachol kama debai lavish. You could wear layers upon layers, right? You go skiing, you put on 5 shirts and 2 pairs of pants, and you might wear layers. I think of my kids when they were little. They used to dress up in the house. They used to put on. I have these great pictures of them wearing 6 or 7 shirts and pants and skirts and things, and then they put stockings on their head and all sorts of funny things, even underwear on their heads, but they did like these funny things. You can imagine someone, they don't normally walk out like that on Shabbat, but theoretically you could walk around wearing that. But when it comes to tefillin, but on regular day, you'd never wear 2 pairs of tefillin. So therefore, in terms of what you can save, so you can't take them more than 1 at a time. Rabban Gamliel. Now we're moving to Rabban Gamliel's approach. 2 pairs. So the Gemara immediately asks, "My kasavar, what does he hold?" Kasavar Shabbat zman tefillinu zug echad in tefelo. If it's 1 pair, if he holds. Now there's a whole big debate. There's a very interesting debate about whether Shabbat is a time for wearing tefillin or not. Whether you're supposed to, or do you wear tefillin on Shabbat? Okay, the 2 main reasons to exempt you for wearing tefillin on Shabbat, which is what we do, but you'll see from this Gemara, not clear that everybody held that way. Some people did think Shabbat was a time that one could wear tefillin. We say, first of all, the psukim about tefillin says miyamim yamima, okay, from day to day. So they say days, regular days, and not, it excludes Shabbat. There's a braita that says that. Another reason is because wearing tefillin is an oath. It's a siman. It's a sign that you're believing in God. And Shabbat is an oath, if you remember that, right? From the OT, right? It's an oath. It's also a sign. So therefore, you don't need the oath of tefillin when you have the oath of Shabbat. So therefore, some people say for that reason, Shabbat is not zman tefillin. Now, if he holds Shabbat is zman tefillin, and therefore when you're wearing it, you're basically fulfilling your mitzvah, then zugachadin tefelo, then we should only allow you to wear 1 pair. You're basically wearing it for the purposes of a mitzvah, and the way you do the mitzvah is 1 pair. And ikasavar Shabbat lasman tefillinu umishum hatzala derech malbush shari le Rabbanan. If you say it's not a time for tefillin, so how could you wear them? Well, you're wearing them because the rabbi said we'll permit you to wear them. Now this goes back also to Masechet Shabbat. What did we learn when we learned about carrying? Right back in the 5th parak, we learned that when are you allowed to carry if something is considered clothing or jewelry? When it crosses the line between clothing or jewelry and it moves into burden, right? Something you wouldn't normally carry, we call it a burden, and then it's forbidden to carry. So, right, we wear clothes all the time on Shabbat. We don't say, oh, we're carrying our clothes. So therefore they say like this, if Shabbat is not a time for generally wearing tefillin, but the rabbis allowed you because they wanted to protect the tefillin. So how did they allow you to wear it though? They allowed you to wear it. It had to fit into some halachic category, fits into the category of clothing. If it fits into the category of clothing, then okay, and then we're going to say, so you can wear multiple pairs of tefillin. Well, if that's the case, afilu tfeinami, you should be able to wear 5 pairs of tefillin then. Why did he cut it off at 2? In other words, either it's 1 because you're fulfilling the mitzvah, or it's more than 1 and then it should be more than 2. So why specifically 2? So la'olam kasavar Shabbat lav zman tefillin. He must hold it's not really a time for tefillin. V'chishar Rabbanan linyan hatzala derech malbush b'mkom tefillin. So, that's the end. V'chishar Rabbanan, when they allowed it, linyan hatzala derech malbush b'makom tefillin. They basically said, we're going to allow you to wear it as clothing where you wear your tefillin. In other words, you can't start wrapping it around your leg or wrapping it somewhere else. It's only where you wear your tefillin. So that still doesn't really answer our question, because then ihachi zug echad nami, or zug echad in tefillah, without the word nami really. So if that's the case, then again, one pair. You can't. How many pairs can you put on your head? How many pairs can you put on your arm? So Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak makom yesh barosh la'aniach bo shtei tefillin. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says there's place in your head to put 2 pairs of tefillin. That's why he allowed 2, because derech mabush they allowed. You could theoretically put 2. So they say, okay, well, that resolves the head. What about tefillin shel yad on the arm? Hani chadirosh, yad ma'ika lememer. And we'll see in a minute that yad means biceps. So how many pairs can you put on your biceps? So ma'ika lememer, kid Rav Huna, like Rav Huna says, the Amar Rav Huna, pa'amim she'adam ba min hasadeh, v'chavilato arosho, misalkam merosho v'koshcham b'zro'o. Rav Huna was talking about a different case. He says, sometimes you're walking in the field, you have your tefillin on your head, because remember, in those days, people did wear tefillin more often during the day. Something that Shuli also talks about in her article, and why that changed. Anyway, he says here, very interestingly, you could be walking on the street, and if you need to carry your burden, it's very disrespectful to stick. Remember, they put things on their heads to carry, to put it on top of your tefillin. So what do? You take off your tefillin, you put it on your arm. What do you see? You must have room in your arm for 2 sets of tefillin. So therefore, both, that's why he says 2. But then they say, wait a minute. He only said it so that you don't disgrace the other set, but he didn't really say that's the way one should do it lechatchila. So therefore, still it doesn't make so much sense. So they say, Ela kedamar of Shmuel bar of Yitzchak, makom yesh b'rosho shavoy laniach bo shnei tefillin, hachanami makom yesh b'yad shavoy laniach bo shnei tefillin. In other words, what they're trying to say is, from Rav Huna, you don't necessarily infer that it's appropriate to wear it. And therefore, if it's not appropriate to do it that way, then it's not derech malbush, and then it becomes a masoya burden, and then you can't do it. But now they're going to say that no, just like Rosh Shmuel bar of Yitzchak said, you have space in your head for 2 sets. We can assume that he would say the same thing, space on your arm for 2 sets. He thinks it's reasonable. You could put 2. Now we're going to bring a braita. Tana debei menashe al yadcha zo kiboret. Okay, what does it mean on your arm? That's your bicep. Beinenecha zo kadkod. That's the crown of your head. Hecha, hecha, where's the crown of your head? The kadkod. It's right where that spot where the child's head is very soft when the child's born till it gets harder. That's this place where you put it. One could try to think of a connection between the idea of tefillin and that idea, but I'm going to leave it at that. Now, we're going to now start this section, which we're going to continue tomorrow, about what is the root of the debate really between Rabban Gamliel and the rabbis. Some of it will be repetition of what we already learned. Lema. Maybe the whole debate between them is, can someone theoretically put on 2 pairs of tefillin or not, which is an interesting machloket, because it's really a machloket about the reality, right? And is there room or is there not room? But that's what they're suggesting. To Tanakama, lately to Rav Shmuel bar of Yitzchak, Rabban Gamliel, lately Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak. Rabban Gamliel thinks there's room for 2 sets, and the rabbis think there isn't room, and that's their debate. But the Gemara says, no, look, that can't be so simple, and so doesn't make sense. Everyone thinks theoretically you could put 2 pairs. It's not a debate of reality. So then what's the machloket? We're going to see 3 suggestions today. One is the one we just said. Okay, we'll start, and then we're going to continue more tomorrow. The whole root of their machloket is Shabbat Zman Tefillin or not? And now we're going to see how that works. Tanakama Savar, Shabbat Zman Tefillinu. Therefore, it's very obvious. You want to fulfill, you can carry it in a way that you're fulfilling the mitzvah. How is that? 1 set, and 1 set only. Rabban Gamliel Savar, Shabbat Lav Zman Tefillin. If Shabbat is Zman Tefillin, then the heter is very easy. You're just fulfilling your mitzvah of wearing tefillin while you do it. But if you say Shabbat Lav Zman Tefillin, then how are you allowed to do this? So then that's what we said before. The rabbis allowed you to do it the way you could possibly wear them. And possibly wear them, well, you could fit 2 pairs, so therefore it's 2 pairs. And that's the debate between them. Alternatively, one could say, everyone agrees that Shabbat you can wear tefillin. Here we're going to start getting into the issue of Baal Tosif. Adding. You're allowed to wear 2 sets of tefillin. Is that adding? Whole debate about what does it mean. The Torah says you can't add on mitzvah. What it means to add mitzvah, would this count as Baal Tosif? It's a big debate. But if you say, and here there's a problem with the Girsa, there's what we have in our Gemara, Rashi in the end rejects and has a different explanation. I'll go with Rashi right now, which is not what it says in our Gemara. Tanakama savar, let's say lo by kavana. Okay, the word lo doesn't appear here, but Rashi says it is. Tanakama says you don't need kavana to fulfill a mitzvah. This is some debate we've seen overall about mitzvot. Do they need intent or not? If you say mitzvot don't need intent, then you fulfill a mitzvah even without intent. So if you put on 2 pairs of tefillin, you're basically doing Baal Tosif. You're saying I'm Yotzei the mitzvah with 2 sets of tefillin, even though that's not your intent. So therefore, you're going to have a problem. And that's why you can only use 1 set. Rabban Gamliel savar lo by kavana. They don't need kavana. So therefore, when you put, right, and this is all if we say, right, that Shabbat is a zman for tefillin, you can fulfill the mitzvah on Shabbat. And therefore, Rabban Gamliel says, you're only fulfilling the mitzvah if you intend to fulfill the mitzvah. So if you put on 1 set, or 2, you put on 2 sets and you say, I'm just doing this to carry, you're not fulfilling any mitzvah. So there's no problem of adding on and wearing 2 sets of tefillin. But if you say that you need kavanah, then you're going to have a problem. And that could be the potential debate between them. We're going to continue with this tomorrow and add on some more possibilities as to what the debate between them is. And we'll discuss some other interesting questions that come up in the background here in tomorrow's daf. Okay, have a great day, everyone.